I never imagined that an ordinary September night would forever change our family and our faith. My name is Laura. I'm a mother of three and a catechism teacher at a small parish near Rome. My daughter Sophia, only 12 years old, has always had a simple and pure faith, the kind typical of children who pray without doubting. But that night, something extraordinary happened. It was a Wednesday evening like any other. Sophia had finished her homework. We had dinner together, and after evening prayers, I had tucked her in as always. "Mom, I'm so tired," she had told me before falling asleep. I couldn't imagine those would be the last normal words before everything changed. Around 3 in the morning, I heard noises coming from her room. They weren't normal cries or nightmares. It sounded like she was talking to someone, but the words were incomprehensible. I rushed to her and found her sitting up in bed, her eyes wide open but glazed over, her face illuminated by a light I couldn't understand where it was coming from. Her room was dark, yet she seemed immersed in a glow. "Sophia! Sophia, sweetheart!" I called to her, gently shaking her. After a few seconds, she blinked and looked at me with an expression I'll never forget. She was no longer my 12-year-old little girl. Her eyes had a depth, an awareness that made my blood run cold. "Mom," she whispered in a trembling voice, "I saw things that haven't happened yet." He showed them to me. He told me I have to tell you, and you have to tell others. What my daughter told me in the following hours shocked me. I frantically took notes as she spoke, afraid of forgetting even a single detail. Here is her testimony exactly as she described it to me. "Mom, I wasn't dreaming. It was different. It was more real than reality. One moment I was sleeping in my bed, and the next moment I was in a place. In a place that wasn't a place. There was no floor, but I wasn't falling. There was no sky, but I could feel infinite space above me. It was like being suspended in a breath." Sophia explained to me that suddenly she was no longer alone. There was a presence beside her, so powerful it almost hurt her heart, but at the same time gave her a peace she had never experienced. She couldn't see a face, but she knew who it was. "It was Jesus, Mom. I know it sounds impossible, but it was him, not like in the catechism drawings. He was immense, full of love, but also of a strength that made everything tremble. He called me by name. The voice had said, 'Sophia, you are only a child, but I have chosen you to carry a message to your mother and, through her, to many others. I will show you things that few have understood. I will show you prophecies written 2,000 years ago that are being fulfilled right now. Watch carefully. Remember everything, because time is shorter than people think.'" Before she could respond or ask questions, my daughter found herself seeing scenes that seemed like movies, but more vivid, more intense. She could feel people's emotions, understand what they were thinking. The first vision took her back in time to a desert scorched by the sun. She saw an elderly man with a long beard and a face marked by sun and worries. Abraham. She recognized his name without anyone telling her, as if that knowledge had been placed directly in her heart. There were 2 women with him. One, older, beautiful, but with eyes full of bitterness and jealousy, Sarah. The other, younger, pregnant, frightened but also determined, Hagar. And between them, the old patriarch seemed to be breaking under the weight of his choices. "I heard an angel's words," Sophia told me, and as she spoke, she was still trembling. "He was speaking about Ishmael, the son Hagar would have. He said, 'His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him, and he will dwell in the presence of all his brothers.'" The voice beside her had explained, "This is where it all began, Sophia. Not with modern politics, not with borders drawn on maps, but with a family, with 2 brothers who would never be reconciled. This is the root of everything you see today in the news about Israel and the Arab countries." My daughter saw centuries scroll by quickly. She saw Ishmael grow up and become the father of 12 princes, just as God had promised Abraham. She saw his descendants spread throughout the Arabian Peninsula, become powerful tribes, entire nations, and she saw Isaac, the son of promise born to Sarah in her old age, and his descendants become the nation of Israel. 4,000 years, the voice had said with a weight Sophia could feel physically. For 4,000 years, this conflict has shaped human history, and it continues today. But this is not the whole story. Watch carefully, Sophia, because what I'm about to show you will surprise many. The scene changed, and my daughter found herself seeing ancient coastal cities full of life and activity, ships arriving from distant lands, warriors with strange armor and advanced weapons. The Philistines. Sophia saw them settle along the Mediterranean coast, build 5 great cities: Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, and Gath. She saw them fight against the ancient Israelites with iron weapons, while their enemies had only bronze. She saw Samson, his supernatural strength, his tragic end. She saw a giant named Goliath, almost 9 feet tall, who challenged the armies of Israel until a shepherd boy with a sling brought him down. The Philistines, the voice had explained. Israel's ancient enemies. But they weren't Arabs. They weren't Jews. They were foreigners who came from the sea, probably from Crete or the Aegean region. They worshipped gods called Dagon and Astarte. They had iron weapons when others still fought with bronze. They were a thorn in Israel's side for centuries. Then Sophia saw centuries pass again. The Philistines gradually faded, like fog in the sun. They mixed with other peoples. Their language died. Their culture was absorbed. Their gods were forgotten. By the time of the Babylonian exile, they were already disappearing. By the time of Rome, they were completely gone. Extinct, the voice had said, and that word fell like a boulder. Completely erased from history over 2,500 years ago. No genetic continuity. No cultural connection. No linguistic link with anyone living today. The Philistines are gone, Sophia. Completely. They left no descendants. Yet their name would be resurrected for a purpose they never could have imagined. What happened next made my daughter cry, even as she told me about it. She saw Roman legions surround Jerusalem in 70 AD. She heard the cries of the Jews trapped inside the starving city. She saw the temple burn. She saw over 1 million dead. She saw survivors chained and taken away as slaves. But then she saw something else. 65 years later, in 135 AD, another Jewish revolt, the Bar Kokhba Rebellion. And after Rome had crushed it, Emperor Hadrian, furious at the cost of that war, had done something cruel. He changed the name of the land, the voice had explained, and Sophia heard anger in those words. Judea, the land of the Jews, became Syria Palestina. Hadrian deliberately chose the name of Israel's ancient enemies, the Philistines, who had been extinct for centuries, to humiliate and mock the Jewish people, to erase their connection to the land, to cut them off from their inheritance. My daughter saw the centuries continue to scroll. She saw Arabs, Bedouins, various tribes settle in the region after the Islamic conquests. But they didn't call themselves Palestinians. They identified with their tribes, with their villages, with their extended families. The term Palestinian was just a geographic reference, like saying Southerner or Northerner. It described where you lived, not who you were as a people. Then the voice showed her something that amazed her. Before 1948, when someone said Palestinian, they often meant Jews, not Arabs. The Palestine Post was a Jewish newspaper, now called the Jerusalem Post. The Palestine Orchestra was composed of Jewish musicians fleeing Europe. It became the Israel Philharmonic Orchestra. Palestinian Jews and Palestinian Arabs both lived in the region under British rule. But the modern Palestinian national identity as a distinct people, the voice had continued, crystallized primarily after 1948, when Israel became a nation again. Before that, Arab leaders themselves denied that there was a Palestinian people distinct from other Arabs. This doesn't mean Arabs didn't live there. They absolutely did, for centuries. But the political identity, the nationalist movement as it exists today, is relatively modern. The vision changed dramatically, and Sophia found herself reading Bible verses as if for the first time, even though she had heard them in catechism class. I will take you from the nations and gather you from all the countries and bring you into your own land. Ezekiel 36:24. In that day, the Lord will reach out his hand a second time to reclaim the surviving remnant of his people. Isaiah 11:11. The second time, the voice had emphasized, making those words tremble in the air. The first time was the return from the Babylonian exile. The second time is happening in your generation, Sophia. You are living through the fulfillment of prophecies spoken 2,500 years ago. Watch, my daughter saw Jews returning to Israel from every nation on earth. She saw them arriving from Europe after the Holocaust. She saw them arriving from Arab countries, Iraq, Yemen, Morocco, Libya. She saw them arriving from Ethiopia, from the Soviet Union when the Iron Curtain fell. She saw them arriving from India, China, South America, from every corner of the globe. Then she saw the date, May 14th, 1948. She watched David Ben-Gurion declare the establishment of the State of Israel. She felt the supernatural nature of that event, the impossible odds. A nation that hadn't existed for 1,897 years suddenly reborn in a single day, exactly as Isaiah 66:8 had predicted. Who has ever heard of such things? Who has seen such things? Can a country be born in a day? No other nation in human history, the voice had said, has been destroyed, scattered to every corner of the earth for nearly 2,000 years, lost its language, its land, its sovereignty, and then come back. None. The Romans are gone. The Ottomans are gone. The Byzantines are gone. But Israel endures because I made a covenant that cannot be broken. Then Sophia saw June 7th, 1967, the Six-Day War, Israeli paratroopers reaching the Western Wall for the first time since 70 AD. She saw them weep, touch the ancient stones with trembling hands. She saw hardened soldiers sob like children. She heard the shofar sound, Jerusalem back in Jewish hands after 19 centuries. They will fall by the sword and will be taken as prisoners to all the nations. Jerusalem will be trampled on by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. The words of Jesus from the Gospel of Luke 21:24 resounded with force. Until, the voice had said, and Sophia felt the weight of that single word. That word until is crucial. It means there's an end point. It means Gentile domination of Jerusalem was temporary, not permanent. And when that time ends, something dramatic happens. Part of that until expired in 1967 when Jerusalem returned to Jewish control. But the final fulfillment is still to come, and it's coming soon. The vision accelerated forward, showing Sophia scenes she recognized from the news. The United Nations General Assembly voting on resolutions about Israel. More resolutions about Israel than about any other country on earth. She saw universities in protest. She saw social media explode with debates. She saw the entire world obsessed with a tiny nation the size of New Jersey with 9 million people. See, I will make Jerusalem a cup that sends all the surrounding peoples reeling. Zechariah 12:2-3. On that day, when all the nations of the earth are gathered against her, I will make Jerusalem an immovable rock for all the nations. All who try to move it will injure themselves. Why is the world more concerned about Israel than about China and the Uyghurs? More focused on Jerusalem than on the genocide in Sudan? The voice had asked rhetorically. Because this isn't about politics, Sophia. It's not about human rights or territorial disputes. If it were, the world would treat Israel like every other nation. But they don't. The nations are literally reeling over this one city. This is supernatural. This is Zechariah's prophecy being fulfilled before your eyes. Then the vision took a darker turn. Sophia saw armies gathering around Jerusalem. Not ancient armies with swords and spears, but modern armies with tanks, jets, missiles. She saw nations from every corner of the earth sending forces toward that one city. I will gather all the nations to Jerusalem to fight against it. Zechariah 14:2. All nations, Sophia. Not some, not many, all. She saw the city under attack from every side: artillery, airstrikes, ground assault. It seemed hopeless. It seemed like the end. Then she saw him, Jesus Christ himself, descending from heaven, and the sight was so glorious, so terrible, so overwhelming that my daughter fell to her knees even in that vision. He wasn't the gentle Jesus from catechism lessons. He was the conquering king, the Lion of Judah, dressed in robes dipped in blood, with eyes like flames of fire. His feet touched the Mount of Olives, and the mountain split in two with a sound like the world breaking. A massive earthquake reshaped the geography itself, and the armies that had gathered against Jerusalem were destroyed by the word from his mouth alone. Then the Lord will go out and fight against those nations. On that day his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, east of Jerusalem, and the Mount of Olives will be split in two from east to west. Zechariah 14:3-4. This is literal, Sophia, the voice had said, not symbolic, not metaphorical. Jesus Christ will physically return to the literal Mount of Olives, to the literal city of Jerusalem, and will establish a literal kingdom from that literal city. But before that final battle, the voice showed my daughter something else, something that terrified her more than anything she had seen so far. She saw a man rise to power. She couldn't see his face clearly, but she could feel his charisma, his brilliance, his magnetic personality. He offered solutions to every problem humanity faced. He spoke with wisdom that seemed supernatural. Leaders from every nation praised him. The media crowned him as humanity's savior. Sophia saw him negotiate a peace deal that seemed absolutely impossible. Israel and surrounding nations signing a covenant, agreeing to 7 years of peace. The Palestinians would get a state. Israel would get security and recognition. Finally, someone had solved the Middle East conflict. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1/7. Daniel 9:27. A week of years, the voice had explained. 7 years. This is the covenant that will begin the final countdown. Sophia saw 3.5 years of peace. Unprecedented prosperity. Israel building a new temple on the Temple Mount. She saw sacrifices being offered according to ancient Jewish law for the first time in 2,000 years. Everything seemed perfect. Then, exactly halfway through the 7 years, at the 1,260-day mark, everything changed in an instant. She saw the same man, the peacemaker everyone had trusted, enter the temple in Jerusalem. He stopped the sacrifice, and then he did the unthinkable. He declared himself to be God, the abomination of desolation, the voice had said, spoken of by the prophet Daniel, standing in the holy place. This is when the great tribulation begins, a tribulation such as has not been from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be. Sophia saw horrors unleashed on earth like nothing in human history. Natural disasters on an unimaginable scale, massive earthquakes, tsunamis, asteroids striking the earth, 1/3 of the earth on fire, 1/3 of the sea turned to blood, demonic manifestations, literal demons released from the abyss, persecution of believers like nothing the early church ever suffered, beheadings, concentration camps, a global system where you couldn't buy or sell without the mark on your right hand or forehead, and taking that mark meant eternal damnation. The choice will be simple, but terrible, the voice had said. Worship the beast and survive temporarily, but lose your soul forever. Or refuse the mark, face martyrdom, but gain eternal life. And through it all, Jerusalem remained the epicenter. Not New York, not Beijing, not Moscow, Jerusalem. Why? Sophia had cried out. Why Jerusalem? Because I chose it, the voice had answered simply. Because I promised it to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Because David's throne was there. Because my temple stood there. Because my son was crucified, buried, and resurrected there. Because my son will return there, and because I will rule the nations from there for 1,000 years. Jerusalem is mine, Sophia. The voice had paused. Then it continued. You've been taught in catechism about heaven. You've learned about salvation through faith. But you've neglected the prophetic timeline. You've ignored the signs. You've treated Israel's rebirth as merely political. You've seen the recapture of Jerusalem as an interesting historical footnote. You've seen the nation's obsession with dividing God's city as just current events rather than prophetic fulfillment. Sophia saw newspaper headlines from our lifetime flash before her. The Oslo Accords, the Camp David Summit, the Roadmap for Peace, the Abraham Accords. Every peace plan requiring the division of Jerusalem. The pieces are on the board, the voice had said. The stage is set. Israel exists again after 2,000 years. Prophecy fulfilled. Jerusalem is back in Jewish hands. Prophecy fulfilled. The Jewish people have been regathered from every nation. Prophecy fulfilled. Hebrew is a living language again. Prophecy fulfilled. The desert is blooming. Prophecy fulfilled. The nations are obsessed with Jerusalem. Prophecy being fulfilled. Then the presence moved even closer to my daughter, and she felt she might faint from the intensity. Sophia, I'm about to tell you something specific. A date, a signpost on the road to the end. October 17th, 2025, the voice had said, and the date was branded into my daughter's consciousness like a burning iron. On this date, watch Jerusalem. Watch what happens in the political realm. A proposal will be made. A plan will be unveiled. A covenant will be suggested. The world will call it a historic breakthrough. They'll say it's the best chance for peace in decades. But those with eyes to see will recognize it for what it is, the beginning of the end. This will not be the final covenant itself, the voice had clarified, but it will be the framework, the blueprint, the proposal that will eventually become the 7-year treaty. When you see this announcement on October 17th, 2025, you will know that everything I've shown you is true. You will know that my word is reliable, and you will know that time is running out. From that date, the clock will truly begin ticking toward the signing of the final covenant. It may be months, it may be a year or two, but the process will have begun. And when that final covenant is signed, when that 7-year peace deal is confirmed, you will have exactly 7 years until I return to the Mount of Olives. The voice had softened slightly, but lost none of its urgency. What do you do with this information, Sophia? First, you believe it. You accept that prophecy is not metaphor. You recognize that the conflict over Israel and Palestine is not primarily about politics or human rights or colonialism, but about ancient family lines, ancient prophecies, and ancient promises that I will not break. Second, you tell others. Tell them that the world's obsession with Jerusalem is supernatural, not natural. Tell them that every attempt to divide that city will result in judgment. Tell them that the peace covenant is coming, and when it does, the clock will start ticking toward the return of the King. Third, prepare hearts. Tell them that Jesus is coming back, not to some spiritual Jerusalem, but to the literal Mount of Olives, to the literal city of David. Tell them to watch for October 17th, 2025. Tell them that when they see that proposal, they should lift up their heads because their redemption is drawing near. Time is shorter than anyone realizes. The stage is ready. The players are in position. The prophecies are aligning. Watch Jerusalem. Watch Israel. Watch for the covenant. And above all, watch for me, because I am coming soon. The vision had begun to fade, and Sophia felt panic rising in her. She didn't want it to end, but the voice had one final message. Go back, Sophia. Go back and tell your mother, and she will tell others. You will face opposition. You will face mockery, but you will gain something far more precious. You will be found faithful when I return. The light had become brighter, painfully bright, and my daughter had felt herself being pulled backward, away from that presence, away from that place. She wanted to stay. She didn't want to go back, but she had no choice. When Sophia finished telling me all this, it was almost 6 a.m. The dawn light was filtering through the curtains. Her eyes were red but clear, completely awake. She didn't look like a 12-year-old girl who had just had a nightmare. She looked like someone who had seen eternity. "Mom, you have to write this down," she told me, gripping my hand. "You have to tell others. I know it sounds crazy. I know people will think I just had a bad dream. But it wasn't a dream, Mom. It was more real than this room. It was more real than you and me sitting here." I looked at my daughter, this child who until a few hours earlier was worried about math homework and friendships at school, and I saw something changed in her. A seriousness, an awareness, a mission. In the days that followed, I prayed incessantly. I sought confirmation in the scriptures. I spoke with priests and theologians I trust. And the more I study, the more I see that what Sophia described corresponds perfectly to biblical prophecies that were written thousands of years ago. October 17th, 2025 is in a few weeks. I don't know what will happen. I don't know if there really will be an announcement about a peace plan for the Middle East. But if it happens, I'll know that what my daughter saw that night wasn't just a dream. It will be confirmation that time is truly short. I share this testimony not to frighten, but to prepare. Not to create panic, but to invite vigilance. Sophia is just a child, but God has always used the small and humble to carry his most important messages. Watch Jerusalem. Watch Israel. Watch that date. And above all, prepare your hearts, because if what my daughter saw is true, the Lord's return is closer than we think. If this testimony has touched your heart, don't let it remain only inside you. Write Amen in the comments as a sign of faith and expectation for the Lord's return. Share this message with at least 3 people you love, because you might be the instrument God uses to open their eyes before it's too late. Time is short. The prophecies are being fulfilled, and your voice, your gesture, your sharing can make an eternal difference.